Well, welcome to this next small group session on the justice of God, and very, very heavy topic in some ways. And so I think it's really great to start your time, that first question, and maybe go around and share, don't let it consume things, but just when have you experienced injustice, or what questions in your own personal life and journey has caused you to really struggle with those two questions? Why do, good things happen to bad people, and why do bad things happen to good people? And of course, maybe by way of review, knowing that some of you, might do your series a few days from when we did our study, or some of you may have been out of town and have not had a chance to watch the message, is that we define justice as God is always fair, righteous, just. He gives everyone what they deserve. We talked about the justice of God is rooted in retribution. In other words, we get for what we do exactly what we deserve. And it's this idea of being paid back, and that it's fair. He's an absolutely righteous judge. But the big point, and if you missed it in any way, is that the timing of God in executing His justice is on His terms. And so sometimes it's in this life, sometimes it's way later. We see people who seem to do just terrible things and seem to do well for years, maybe decades. And sometimes His justice is executed in eternity. And so we don't know. One of the passages that you might jot down that's been a real encouragement to me is Psalm 73. And in Psalm 73, the psalmist there is so struggling with why the unrighteous and people that are evil are prospering, that he almost loses his faith. And then he walks you through a journey there where he gets perspective. And it's interesting. The perspective is judgment. The perspective is when he steps back and says, now this is how God looks at it, and this is what happens to people in the long haul. So, let me encourage you to have a good time and share around that. And then by way of review, I gave a number of ways, and you read in the chapter where God reveals it through the natural order. That's sort of that external witness. There's the kind of the internal order of our conscience, and how the Lord speaks to us, and that inner sense of this is right, this is wrong. And then the scripture is very clear that God is judge. Jesus said, I am the judge. The Father has entrusted all this to me. And then probably the two major points I wanted to really make on the justice of God was the cross, and be very, very clear on the gospel. And so could I just tell you, don't assume in your groups. Let's have a time where you say, is everybody really clear on the gospel? What is it that makes us right with God? What does it mean to be forgiven? What's it mean to have a second birth? Let's just make sure that we don't assume that. I did some research recently, and half of all evangelical believers think that their salvation has to do with, well, you believe in Jesus, but there's a lot of these good works, and good works are important. They're the result of our new relationship with God, but our good works don't make us right with God. So I would make sure that you're really clear on the gospel and have a good discussion around that. And then I have to tell you that the questions that came up around the judgment of believers in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 10 through 15. I had quite a number of conversations. And so all I can say is let me give you two resources. One is Randy Alcorn wrote a book, and it's a small called Eternal Rewards. And Bruce Wilkinson wrote a book, and I think the title of his is The Life God Rewards. And it's all about the judgment and rewards for believers. And so if that's an interest and really perked some of your thinking, I would encourage you to download that book. And both of them are very, very brief. But have a good discussion about, here's the question behind this, is your current trajectory. I mean, when you honestly look at your life, your time, your treasure, your talent, in your current trajectory, does it really reflect seeking first God and His kingdom? Is it going to be a judgment seat of Christ experience that you're looking forward to? I mean, you're certainly aware that you'll fall short. You know that your motives I don't know anyone, and I don't think there's anyone whose motives have been 100% pure. But do you feel good about and think well about where you're headed in terms of being committed to His Word, sharing and being connected as you pray. That your finances and your priorities and your time and using your gifts and your focus toward family and relatives and your concern for neighbors, your concern for those outside of Christ at work, your integrity. Those are big issues. And this is one of those messages that I think we really need to pause and take stock and say, Lord, I really want you to speak to me, and I want to respond. And I would really remind you, this is, like chapter 8 in the book. We can be pretty vulnerable now, but please, please don't share anything with anyone else that's not in this room, that's in this group. Because if you're really honest, we're messy people. We have struggles. We blow it. We have addictions. We have things in our closet. And those things never, ever get addressed until they come out into the open. And one of the reasons, if you were in the service, that I had us have a time of prayer and confession, I wanted people, before they heard about God's justice, to be in Psalm 32 and to realize a man as godly as David committed adultery, committed murder, and then he hid it. And he had this miserable life, and he was depressed and struggled because he hid it. And when he confessed it, then God was very merciful. Of course there were some consequences, but God forgave, and God had a great word to say in the New Testament about David, even after all of that he was a man after God's own heart. And so being a man or a woman after God's own heart isn't always about our history. It's about the trajectory and how do we respond to the things that we do and the things that we go through, and even the mistakes and the sins that we make. No one is perfect. That's not an excuse to say, oh, keep on keeping on with what you're doing, but it really is a comfort to realize God is the God of grace and second and third and fifth chances, and more at times. So anyway, finally, I want to say, please, some of you that have a real tight conscience, I had a discussion afterwards I just wanted to dispel. A guy that I know, not real well, but fairly well, he just looked at me and goes, man, I'm done. He used a different word, but I'm super messed up. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, everything I do is selfish. Even when I give, it's selfish. And what he was getting at is, I think he's of a personality type and a tender heart toward God, that he felt like, if my motives aren't 100% right, I've blown it completely. And I would just pause to say, as I told him, I don't know anybody whose motives are 100% right. I think we have a Heavenly Father that really understands us, and as we're moving forward and doing what He wants us to do, I'm always going to err on the side of I'm going to do what's right, and I want to have the right motives, and I'm moving that direction, and you know what, if God speaks and goes, why did you do that, and convicts me, I'm going to confess that and make it right. But other than that, I think to overanalyze your motives all the time can send you into some introspection that's really not very healthy. So, I want to say to the Lord, search me, O God. Is there anything between us, or show me my motives? And God is faithful. He will very specifically show you. And like every other sin, we confess that. But don't get hung up. This guy, I could tell his facial expression was, man, I'm cooked, I'm done. The judgment seat of Christ is going to be terrible, when the fact of the matter is, as I look at his life, he's a serious believer following the Lord and is making time for God and priority and generous with his time and his money. And so don't get hung up on the motive. And finally, I think this is one that's going to come out. My multiple conversations afterwards were people with unresolved forgiveness issues, not taking their own revenge, and sticky issues, family issues, marriage issues, betrayal issues. And I think we have to hold one another to say, we really do have to release and forgive those people. And then let's be wise. That doesn't mean reconciliation is going to happen automatically. That doesn't mean that you have a blind eye and just, whatever they say goes. You have to be very shrewd and very wise. And yet, we're commanded to forgive and to release them and to free you. and then be very wise and get counsel and get help about how to relate to people that have wounded you or hurted you. Hurted you. I think I just made up a new word. Well, anyway, as you can tell, I'm a little bit tired. It was a great sense of God's weekend, especially one of the services. I think we had 30 or 40 people. I was just prompted in one of the services. I sensed there was a lot of people, and as I began to pray and lead people in a prayer of salvation, I heard people all over the room, saying it out loud, and I just asked them that particular service to raise your hand, and there had to be 30 or 40 people minimum who raised their hand. So, God's at work, and He is just, He is fair, but there's a lot of injustice in the world. Final thought is let's be about bringing justice in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, and in these areas that we're burdened about. Let's not look at the world and go, wow, this is messed up. Let's look at the world and say, okay, I can't do everything, but I'm going to take some steps about bringing righteousness and justice and relief and love in places where it's not. And that's the Jesus in you and the Jesus in me making a difference. That's Romans 12 Christians. Hey, God bless you. Keep pressing ahead. This next week, we're going to talk about the love of God. And I'm excited to get to be reminded with you of how high, how deep, how wide, how long, how infinite God's love is for ordinary people like you and me. God bless you. Why don't you go ahead and kind of get the sharing time, and hope you have a wonderful time and that God meets you in your group in a powerful way.